My apartment in Capitol Hill had always been my sanctuary. Tall windows let in the late afternoon sun, painting the walls with shifting shades of gold and orange. Every time I came home, I felt a surge of relief, as if the bustling world outside was finally at bay. I cherished my independence, my early mornings with strong black coffee, the hours at my architecture firm downtown, and my evening runs through Volunteer Park, where the wind and the towering trees cleared my thoughts. I liked control, predictability, and the sense that I had a handle on every aspect of my life. But then Rachel arrived, and she turned my carefully curated universe upside down. I first met her at work. We were in the same department, though she was technically new to the company. She had transferred from another firm in Chicago and seemed eager to adapt to Seattle's unique style. Rachel was tall, slender, with blonde hair usually pulled into a loose bun that danced on the back of her neck. Her eyes were a deep, warm brown, flecked with hints of gold when the light hit them just right. She had a confidence about her that wasn't loud or cocky. Rather, it was the quiet assurance of someone who knew their worth, but never felt the need to broadcast it. I admired her from afar at first, noticing how she could dissolve tensions in a meeting with a gentle laugh or calm observation. Soon enough, small interactions brought us together. We worked late one Thursday, both trying to finalize revisions for a client who seemed to change her mind every other hour. By the time the clock struck 9, we were the only two souls in the usually bustling open office. The overhead lights hummed, and the sense of camaraderie sparked between us as we tinkered with 3D models on our computers. We exchanged stories about how we ended up in architecture. Me, because I found solace in spaces that I could design to my liking, and Rachel, because she believed buildings could tell stories of the people who lived and worked within them. It felt easy to talk to her. She had this ability to listen with her whole being. Her brown eyes would focus intently on my face, and she'd tilt her head ever so slightly, as though capturing each word. I wasn't used to that level of attention. Most colleagues and acquaintances drifted in and out of my space, but Rachel seemed to really see me. I found myself talking more than usual, letting out bits of personal detail, my struggles with perfectionism, my love for quiet mornings, my reluctance to let anyone get too close. She never judged or teased. Instead, she'd nod thoughtfully, sometimes offering a soft smile. Over the following weeks, we developed an easy friendship. We'd grab coffee together before morning meetings, or sit side by side in the break room with our lunches. Rachel had a sense of humor that wasn't always immediate. Sometimes she'd slide a witty remark into the conversation so subtly that I wouldn't catch it until minutes later, which would then make me laugh out loud. She teased me gently about my regimented lifestyle, how I never left the house without checking my to-do list, how my shirts were always perfectly ironed, how I set my phone alarm to go off for literally everything. But her teasing was warm, never mean-spirited, and it made me open up to the idea that maybe my life could use a tiny bit more spontaneity. We became friends, then good friends. We started sitting together during lunch breaks, accompanied each other to happy hours with coworkers on Fridays, and eventually began to spend time outside of work. I discovered that she enjoyed a good scotch, had an interest in abstract art, and secretly wrote short poems about people she observed on the streets, just little verses capturing someone's mood or the color of their scarf in the rain. I would tease her back, asking if she planned to publish them, to which she'd only smile and shrug, as though it didn't matter either way. But then came a specific moment, an instant so delicate that it changed everything between us. We were at my apartment one evening, trying to finalize the design of a terrace for one of our clients, a cafe that prided itself on sustainable living. It was raining outside, one of those relentless Seattle downpours that turned everything gray. My windows were steamed, and the warm lamp on my desk cast a cozy glow across our notebooks and architectural sketches. Rachel was sitting close to me, analyzing the structural angles, pointing out how the plan might accommodate plants and water drainage more effectively. Her hair was half out of its bun, a few strands framing her face, and I remember being momentarily transfixed by the shape of her jaw. It was such a simple detail, yet something about it made my chest tighten. At one point, I made a silly joke about the client's insistence on using only reclaimed materials, which required us to track down nearly antique planks of wood from obscure salvage yards. Rachel threw her head back and laughed. It was the first time I saw her laugh so openly, the sound reverberating in my small loft. Her expression lit up, her eyes brimming with amusement, and a lock of hair fell across her cheek. That was when I felt the first spark, a flicker of something dangerous and unfamiliar, an urge that made my heart pound. I'd never thought of Rachel as anything but a friend, but that single laugh, that tilt of her neck, ignited a storm of feelings inside me. I tried to push it down, telling myself it was nothing. Yet, from that point on, I would occasionally catch my gaze drifting to her, noticing how her blouse fit across her shoulders, or how her lips parted slightly when she was lost in thought. I am not the type to let emotions run rampant. In fact, I'd prided myself on never diving too deep into relationships or vulnerabilities. I kept a tidy life for a reason. It was far less painful to keep people at arm's length. But Rachel wasn't just any person. She slipped through the cracks of my defenses. And every day that passed, I found more reasons to be entranced by her presence. It was like falling asleep on a train that was slowly gathering speed. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when everything changed, but I woke up to find I was barreling forward. The tension built in subtle ways. We'd stand next to each other at the coffee machine in Dow, and my heart would flutter if her hand brushed mine. Or we'd be in a conference room, and I'd look up to see her brown eyes on me, filled with an intensity I couldn't name. We never spoke of it, but it was there. A secret that we were both too afraid to confess. One Friday after work, we went to the Hideout, a bar known for its eclectic decor and neon signs. We settled into a corner booth. The city's noise felt muffled in that little space. It was just the two of us, chatting about everything and nothing. The golden overhead light reflected in her eyes. As we joked about weekend plans, her fingertips casually brushed mine on the table. It was such a small gesture, but my skin tingled from the contact, my senses heightened in a way they'd never been before. She looked at me with a question in her gaze, and I knew she was asking more than whether I wanted another round of drinks. It was a question of possibility, of crossing a boundary neither of us had dared to name. "Have you ever?" she began softly, but then hesitated. I understood her instantly. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. My mouth was dry. I had no clear answer because nothing about my feelings for her was clear or straightforward. "I don't know," I managed, truthfully. She nodded as though that made perfect sense. Yet her hand lingered on mine for a moment longer. That night, we didn't push each other for anything more. But in the hush of that brief contact, everything in me was shouting. The problem with harboring feelings you know you shouldn't is that they rear up at the most inconvenient times. We'd be in the middle of a meeting, and I'd glance at the back of her neck, where a stray lock of hair curled against her skin. I'd feel my stomach flip, and I'd have to distract myself by refocusing on the conversation. Or we'd be walking to lunch, and she'd accidentally brush my shoulder, and I'd be overcome by a wave of warmth. I told myself it was just a phase, that I was merely intrigued by something new. I'd never dated a woman before, and though I suspected I wasn't strictly straight, I'd never pursued that other possibility. But the more time I spent with Rachel, the more I felt I was losing control, like water slipping through my fingers. The tension built, shaping itself into quiet gestures that only we could interpret. She started offering me rides home when it rained, and I started offering to stay late to help her with projects. At her place, we'd sometimes share takeout, sitting on her plush living room rug surrounded by the glow of a single lamp. We never confessed our attraction out loud, but the silence between us was charged with it. One night stands out in particular. We were at a coworker's birthday celebration, cramped in a booth at a loud bar. Music thumped around us. Lights swirled, and our group was half lost in conversation. Rachel and I were pressed together, shoulder to shoulder. The heat of her body against mine was overwhelming, and at one point, we turned toward each other simultaneously, our faces only inches apart. She looked at me like she was searching for something, her eyes flicking down to my lips before returning to my eyes. I realized then that if I dared to lean in, she would meet me halfway without hesitation. But I didn't. Fear clamped down on me, reminding me that crossing that line was dangerous. I wasn't sure I was brave enough to accept the consequences. One night, everything changed in a sudden, swirling storm. Seattle's weather can be erratic, and that evening, it decided to unleash a torrential downpour so fierce that the streets became rivers. Rachel had come over to work on a final design for a downtown renovation project. Her own internet had been cutting in and out thanks to the storm, so my place was her best bet for a stable connection. We worked for hours. By the time we saved the final draft of the project, it was well past midnight. Rain pounded on the windows, and the howling wind whipped across the street. She peered outside at the sheets of water cascading from the sky. Her car was a few blocks away, and walking there seemed like a gamble. "You can crash here," I offered without thinking too hard about it. "I have a couch." She turned to me, eyes both tired and bright. "Or I could sleep in your bed," she said simply. There was no flirting lilt to her voice, no teasing. It was a straightforward statement that made the air thicken around us. My palms turned clammy, and my throat went dry. My rational mind screamed that this was dangerous, that I was opening a door I might not be able to close, but I couldn't seem to form a single word of refusal. "Okay," I replied, as casually as I could manage. She nodded, biting her lower lip in a slight, nervous gesture that contradicted the calmness in her tone. We silently headed to my bedroom. I handed her a spare t-shirt and a pair of shorts. She thanked me, then stepped into the bathroom to change. I changed in the bedroom, facing away from the mirror so I wouldn't have to see the flushed, anxious look on my face. When she emerged, my breath nearly caught. Rachel stood there in my t-shirt and shorts, her blonde hair tumbling out of its usual bun, falling around her shoulders. There was something disarming about seeing her wear my clothes, something intimate that tugged at the pit of my stomach. We climbed into bed, each on our own side, careful not to touch. The space between us felt impossibly small. The lamp was off, but faint light from the street lamps outside illuminated the room enough that I could make out her silhouette. Rain drummed a steady rhythm against the window, and I could practically hear the pulse of my heart in my ears. At some point, I started trembling. Whether from nerves or something else, I wasn't sure, but I couldn't stop. "You're shaking," she whispered. Her voice was close. "Cold," I lied, trying to steady myself. The sheets rustled as she shifted, and then I felt her move closer. She pressed her lips to my temple in a gentle kiss, the heat of her breath sending chills down my spine. I closed my eyes, torn between wanting to sink into that simple affection and wanting to bolt from the bed. When she pulled back, our faces aligned. My eyes opened, and in the faint glow, I could see her gaze searching mine. Neither of us said a word. It was an electric, fragile moment, two people on the edge of a precipice, uncertain whether to step back or leap into the abyss. We ended up not sleeping at all that night, though nothing more happened than that delicate kiss. We lay there, awake in the hush, hearts pounding, while the storm raged on outside. The next day, we didn't talk about it. Morning came, and the rain had subsided to a mere drizzle. We prepared to head to work as though nothing was out of the ordinary. We got dressed, sipped some coffee, and walked out together. I was too afraid to broach the topic, and she seemed hesitant too. It became an unspoken agreement, a precarious dance where we pretended the night before had never happened, while also knowing it had changed something irreversibly. At the office, we kept our usual routine, exchanging polite smiles, working together on projects, greeting our colleagues as if we were simply co-workers. But every time we made eye contact, I felt an electric jolt, a reminder of how close we'd been in the darkness. The tension grew heavier over the following week, saturating the air. We found ourselves alone late at night at my place or hers, quietly clinging to the last threads of professionalism, neither of us daring to cross the line. When we were out with friends, our knees would bump under the table, and I'd pull my leg away too abruptly, a flush creeping up my cheeks. As the days passed, it became harder and harder to maintain this act of denial. Eventually, she cornered me one evening, standing in my kitchen while I rinsed dishes from our takeout. She placed her hand lightly on my arm, halting me. "Can we talk about it?" she asked, voice gentle. I knew what she meant. I wanted so badly to say yes, to open myself up and be honest about the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me, yet fear loomed. Once we acknowledged the truth, there'd be no going back. I pretended not to understand. "Talk about what?" Her eyes flickered with hurt. She knew I was feigning ignorance. She gave my arm a soft squeeze, but I wouldn't meet her gaze. Eventually, she let go, turned, and left the kitchen. The frustration in her posture cut me like a knife, but still I kept my guard up, convinced I was protecting both of us from a potential disaster. Then came the night she stepped into my shower, and I realized there was no turning back. Another storm had rolled through. Seattle's weather was making a habit of reflecting my inner turmoil. The wind rattled the old windows in my loft, and the downpour made the city's neon lights glisten on the wet pavement outside. Rachel had come over again, initially to watch a movie and unwind after a tough day at work. We ended up talking late into the evening, seated side by side on my sofa with bowls of popcorn on our laps. I remember feeling especially restless that night. My defenses were wearing thin. Every time her knee brushed mine, I felt a surge of longing. Every time she turned her head and I caught a whiff of her vanilla and jasmine perfume, it triggered an ache inside me. I was convinced I needed some space to breathe, to collect myself. "I'm going to take a quick shower," I announced after a lull in the conversation, standing up so abruptly that the popcorn threatened to tip over. She glanced at me, eyebrows raised, but said nothing. I fled to the bathroom, heart pounding in my chest. Stripping off my clothes, I stepped into the stall and let the hot water cascade over me, hoping it would wash away the swirling confusion in my mind. Steam filled the air, and for a moment I stood there, pressing my hands to the tiled wall. My eyes closed. Then I heard the door open. My heart lurched. I froze, water splashing over my shoulders. "Rachel?" I said, my voice echoing slightly in the small bathroom. She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the glass door of the shower and stepped in. My breath caught at the sight of her, partially obscured by the swirling steam. She was wearing a t-shirt and shorts that clung to her skin, now soaked through. The water drenched her hair, causing blonde strands to stick to her neck. For a moment, we simply stared at each other through the mist, the water drumming on the tile floor. I couldn't move, pinned in place by 1,000 conflicting emotions: panic, desire, confusion, longing. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked, voice low enough that I barely heard it over the spray. My immediate response should have been yes. I had lived my life carefully, never letting others too close, never risking more than I could handle. But in that moment, something in me snapped. The fear was still there, but so was the relentless pull toward her, the undeniable truth that I wanted this more than I'd wanted anything else in a long time. I shook my head, slowly at first, then more decisively. My voice came out in a whisper. "No." She drew closer. Our bodies were only inches apart now, water pouring over our shoulders, trickling down our faces. I could see the water droplets on her eyelashes, see the tension in her jaw, the vulnerability in her gaze. Cautiously, I reached up and placed my hands on either side of her face, feeling her wet hair beneath my fingertips. We locked eyes, each breath shallow and ragged, as if we were about to step off a high ledge. When our lips finally met, it felt inevitable and surprising all at once. A spark ignited inside me as I tasted the water on her mouth, felt her exhale against my cheek. The kiss began tender, an unspoken question, "Is this okay?" But quickly, it deepened, fueled by all the nights of silent longing. I felt a surge of warmth that had nothing to do with the hot water and everything to do with her. We broke apart briefly, foreheads touching, water still cascading down. In that breathless pause, I noticed her trembling, the same way I'd been trembling that night in my bed. It was a trembling of need, of fear, of surrender. I pressed my forehead against hers, closing my eyes. "Rachel," I whispered, the name both a plea and a confession. Her hand slid around my waist, and she pulled me closer, the tension in my body giving way to a dizzying sense of relief. In that charged moment, my mind went blissfully blank. The world outside the shower ceased to exist. There was only the rush of water and the warmth of her arms around me. After that night, there was no going back to the pretense of being just friends or even just coworkers. We found ourselves in a new territory, full of excitement and terror. At the office, we became co-conspirators in a secret affair, exchanging knowing looks over computer monitors, brushing hands in passing. Each mundane moment felt heightened, every glance laced with memories of water and heat and trembling. Outside of work, our nights became intimate explorations. We spent hours talking, truly talking, about our fears, our childhoods, our dreams, the paths we hadn't taken. We discovered how differently we approached life. I was cautious and meticulous. She was spontaneous and intuitive. Yet somehow, those differences drew us closer, each conversation unveiling another layer of connection. But alongside the wonder, fear took root. I was new to these feelings, new to navigating a relationship that challenged my sense of identity. How would our colleagues react if they found out? How would my family respond? And more than that, was I even cut out for the raw intimacy of a relationship that demanded me to be fully present, fully vulnerable? I tried to pretend it was all fine, that I could handle the swirl of emotions. But the more I tried to keep it together, the more I felt I was slipping out of my own depth. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Rachel and I found ourselves in another argument. Although calling it an argument might be too strong a word, it was more of an emotional standoff, the weight of unsaid things pushing us apart. "You're pulling away," she finally said, sadness clouding her eyes. I wanted to deny it, but I couldn't. She could see it. It was written all over my face. "I'm scared," I admitted, lowering my gaze to the floor. She stepped closer, her hand hovering over mine before eventually resting on my— Of what? Of everything, I whispered. Of losing control, of what this means, of what people will think, of where this is going. She inhaled deeply, and for a moment, her entire expression softened in understanding. But then she asked the hardest question of all. Do you want this or not? I couldn't answer. My heart screamed yes, but my head was churning with 1,000 reasons why it was too dangerous. I couldn't form the words, so I stayed silent. Hurt flashed in her eyes, and she let go of my arm. Then tell me when you figure it out, she said, voice trembling. She left my apartment, shutting the door behind her quietly. In that gentle sound was a heartbreak I didn't have the courage to face. For the next few days, I moved through life in a daze. At the office, I buried myself in projects, trying to distract my heart from the gaping hole of Rachel's absence. I told myself I just needed time to think, to steady myself, to clarify what I really wanted. Yet every hour that passed without seeing her or hearing her voice felt like an ache that wouldn't subside. When I saw her in the corridors or at a group lunch, we barely exchanged words. She offered me polite nods, and I tried to respond in kind, all too aware of the tension that now defined us. At times, I'd catch her gaze from across the office, and the longing in her eyes would nearly undo me, but I held fast, locked in my cycle of fear and indecision. Nights were worse. The quiet emptiness of my loft weighed me down. I'd lie awake, remembering the warmth of her kiss in the shower, the gentle way she'd run her fingers through my damp hair. The memory was so vivid that I could almost smell her perfume on my pillow. My chest felt hollow, as if part of me had gone missing the moment she walked out that door. The truth was, I loved her. I had been falling for her from the moment she first laughed in my apartment, her head tilted back in complete abandon. I was just too scared to give that love the name it deserved. Eventually, I worked up the courage to seek her out. I told myself it might be too late, that maybe she'd grown tired of my uncertainty. Still, I had to try. One evening after work, I stayed back, hoping she'd do the same. I hovered by her cubicle, my heart thudding in my ears. But she left early, slipping out with her bag slung over her shoulder, eyes straight ahead, not even glancing in my direction. I tried again the following day, and the next, but she always seemed a step ahead or behind me, careful not to cross paths. On Friday, I mustered what little courage I had and sent her a text. Me, can we talk? I waited and waited, no reply. That night, I paced around my apartment, staring at my phone, checking the battery, adjusting the volume, refreshing messages, anything to distract myself from the gnawing tension in my stomach, but it remained silent. By Saturday, I was consumed with a desperation I didn't recognize in myself. I grabbed my keys and headed into the rainy Seattle evening, determined to track her down. After several tries, I recalled that she frequented a small corner cafe near Pike Place Market on weekend mornings. She loved their lavender lattes and the way the pastries always tasted fresh from the oven. The next morning, I woke early, barely sleeping the night before. I made my way downtown, weaving through crowds of tourists and locals braving the drizzle in search of fresh fish and farm produce. My heart was hammering as I approached the cafe. I peered inside through the glass windows, scanning the tables. There, near the back, was Rachel. She was hunched over a mug, staring out the window, lost in thought. I paused on the sidewalk, suddenly terrified. What if she refused to talk to me? What if she'd moved on? But a flicker of movement inside spurred me to push open the door. My steps felt heavy as I approached her table. She looked up when I neared, and her eyes went wide with surprise. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, gently, I slid into the chair across from her. The warmth of the cafe contrasted sharply with the chill of my nerves. She swallowed, setting her mug down. "Hey," she said softly, voice colored with guarded caution. "Hi," I managed, trying not to glance away. "Can we talk?" She didn't say anything, just nodded. Her posture was stiff, as though she were bracing for disappointment. I inhaled, counting my breaths, gathering myself. The cafe hummed with morning chatter around us, the smell of coffee beans, the hiss of steam from the espresso machine, the scraping of a spoon against a ceramic cup. All of it felt distant, overshadowed by the tension between us. "I'm sorry," I began quietly, "for shutting you out, for leaving you in the dark." Her gaze flickered, and she exhaled a tremulous breath. "Why did you—" "I was afraid," I admitted, my voice trembling, afraid of how much I felt, afraid of what it meant, For me and for us. I've never done this before. I know, she whispered. But I also know, I continued, my voice thick with emotion, that being with you felt more real than anything I've experienced in a long time. I can't keep pretending that I don't care. She looked at me, eyes welling with relief and hesitation all at once. What do you want from me now? I reached across the table, my hand hovering over hers before finally coming to rest atop it. I want a second chance. To be brave this time. To do this right. Silence hung between us for a long moment, punctuated by the hum of the cafe. Then she turned her hand over, tangling her fingers with mine. A soft glimmer danced in her brown eyes. Okay, she said at last, a tremor of a hopeful smile curving her lips. Let's try. And so we began again, this time with open eyes. It wasn't easy. We had awkward talks about how to define our relationship, about the potential fallout at work if anyone disapproved, about the challenges of me stepping outside the safety of my old boundaries. There were moments when I panicked, moments when she lost patience with my insecurities, moments when life intruded in messy ways. But we made a conscious effort to communicate honestly. If something scared me, I told her. If she felt uncertain, she told me. Slowly, we found our rhythm. Quiet nights watching documentaries on my couch, morning runs together, something I never imagined doing alongside someone else, evening strolls through Seattle's hidden neighborhoods. Sometimes, we'd even show up at the office together, not caring if a few glances lingered. And in the evenings, we'd stand in the kitchen, cooking dinner side by side, the overhead light reflecting on her hair, her laughter filling my loft with warmth. One evening, after a successful presentation at work, we decided to celebrate at the Hideout, the same bar where we'd sat so many months ago, dancing around our feelings. This time, we didn't hide our affection. When our colleagues teased us, we shot them playful glares. And when the night wound down, Rachel and I lingered by the bar, finishing our drinks, quietly leaning into each other's warmth. As we walked out into the cool Seattle night, I looped my arm through hers. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, and the air smelled of rain and the hint of salt from the nearby Puget Sound. I realized with a burst of clarity how much I loved living in this city, how much I loved the woman walking beside me, and how close I'd come to losing it all. We made our way back to my loft. I brewed a pot of tea, and we settled on the couch, wrapped in soft blankets. The hush of the apartment felt comforting now, rather than lonely. A late-night fog drifted across the window panes, enveloping the city in a silvery glow. I turned to Rachel, gently cupping her face. "I'm so glad you walked into my life," I said, voice trembling with the weight of gratitude. "Even if it took me a while to admit it." She smiled, pressing a tender kiss to the inside of my palm. Me too. In that quiet moment, I recognized how we had both changed since we first met. She had challenged my need for control, and I had learned to let go, piece by piece, to make room for another person in my well-ordered world. She, in turn, had discovered that patience could be her greatest gift, waiting for me to catch up to what she'd known all along, that what we had was real and worth fighting for. Now, months later, I'm sitting in that same loft, reflecting on how far we've come. The late afternoon light pours through the windows, painting the walls with gold and orange once again. Outside, Seattle's skyline stretches, a mix of modern glass towers and historic brick buildings, a testament to time's passage and the city's ever-evolving narrative. Rachel is in the kitchen, humming softly as she flips through a recipe book, contemplating what new dish to try. The smell of her perfume, vanilla and jasmine, lingers in the air, each trace reminding me of the first moment I realized I wanted more than friendship. She glances over, meeting my eyes, and we exchange a smile that holds a universe of memories and promises. My heart feels full. For the first time in my life, I've let someone occupy my space, not just physically, but emotionally. We've merged routines, made room for each other's quirks, and discovered that love can be terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I won't say it's perfect. No relationship is, but it's ours, and that makes it worth every risk. I learned that some things cannot be controlled, no matter how hard I try. Sometimes, all we can do is open ourselves to the possibility that love could be the best, most unforeseen adventure of our lives. And you? Do you believe that love deserves a second chance?